Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here at DataCon LA. My name is Carlos Olivas. I am your host. Your co-host is Mitzi Bandera in the back. So the session is being live streamed on Zoom, and it also is also being recorded. The recordings will be available online in a couple weeks. So if you want to rewatch it, they'll be made available to you. I think they will send out an email. You guys will be able to see it. Just a reminder to please keep your phone silent during the session. I'll hand it on to our speaker.
Hey, thank you. Hey, great to be here, everyone. So just a little bit of background. I'm with a company called Tricentis. I'm not going to go into our company. You can look us up online, tricentis.com. So what I'm going to talk about today is really business value. So you've been to this conference and you've seen all this great stuff on data analytics, data science, and all that. Okay, what's the purpose? Why are we companies willing to, like Disney, like other companies, put money into this? They want a business value out of it. And what I'm going to focus in on is what is causing that business value not to happen. And it's one of the biggest problems in data today. Somebody earlier had a $3.1 trillion data quality issue on the screen as the cost to business. And it's pretty accurate. That's actually from Thomas Redman, who's the Harvard professor who I'll give you a little hint. Thomas Redman, he's the godfather of data quality. So I'm Harvard Business Analytics certified, but the key is that when you're looking at these processes and the things that you're doing, when you go into the companies and you say to them, hey, I want to find my project that Christian wants me to do. So what would look better on your resume, Christian, is a test. I did a project to go out and map all the trash cans in LA. Or I went out and I solved a $50 million AML customer process. Which would you like to see better, right? So those are things to think about. So I'm kind of melding this conversation a little along the ways of like, okay, here's how we do those types of things, all right? Hopefully it all come together in the end. Okay, the down arrow didn't work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem. What are the consequences? So we talk about those dollars, why it's not solved, how to solve it, the benefits of doing so. All right. So you're learning a lot about data governance in this process. Okay. So there's these different pillars that every CDO should know. Okay. So when your CDO is up there and you say, what does that guy do? He's supposed to be doing this. All right. And his job is metadata, data cataloging. Be able to understand, okay, what data does the company have? Master data. Master data, kind of talk about that a little bit in a minute, is kind of a response to bad data. I need to have a place that I can go and find the good data. Instead of there being 50 addresses for Curtis ODell, I need to know which one is the correct address, right? Then data security, something that we really need to pay a big attention to, and really kind of starts to get the most of their problem, because everyone knows about the publicity around data breaches, and then data lifecycle. How do we store data? What do we do with it? How long we retain it? And then they often forget about data quality. This is really one of the key marks of what has to happen. We were talking about it just a minute ago. The data's no good, then all is lost. All right. So, and that is really a problem. And I'll kind of explain to you how it breaks down as we go. So data goes across all this complex landscape, right? So it comes through from your applications, comes from your ERP systems, your SAPs, your Oracles, all these guys, flows through this process, ends up going into different places that it's going to end up with your beautiful analytic. AI and machine learning processes, big problem area, okay? What do machine processes learn from machine learning? Data. Okay, it's artificial intelligence. It's artificial dumb intelligence. We've got literally billion-dollar use cases where they've learned from bad data, so they're not very smart. And there's artificial smart intelligence, but that's not given. You have to make sure the data is good to get those outcomes. So application changes come up. You've got environmental changes that happen all the time, and you've got these data problems that continue to come up with incorrect data, duplicate data, all the things that come with it. And they manifest themselves going through this process in two important places: compliance, and visualization dashboard. So you're writing all these cool algorithms to give you the visuals. I should speak better. The visual representation of the data and the compliance. Now, is it fun to work with compliance? Is everybody grew up saying, I want to be an insurance man or I can work in compliance, right? No, okay? But if you go talk to your CDO, you go talk to your CEO, this is what keeps him up at night. The regulators on the door. So we work with company, you think you know the regulators, FDA, under all of pharma and health, you've got IRSA, FINSA, you've got FFEIC in the banks, you've got Federal Reserve. All these people show up and guess what they ask for? Data. They want data. And the data better be right, or if you miss every scenario on an AML, so anti-money laundering is one of the biggest, it's actually the biggest data problem in the world, $4 trillion problem. Only 1% of it is being addressed. And the governments are sick of it. They are cracking down on the banks saying, and the insurance, all these people and saying, you don't get everything covered with your data, we find you $10,000 an incident. One of our customers is a $50 million problem. So would you rather have on your resume, I solved a $50 million problem? These are how you get to beat a CDO, is by solving these big problems. They're not sexy, I admit, there's some of the other things you're gonna see, but this is the most important thing you can do for a company. So a lot of people say, well, we're going through cloud migrations and data migrations from on-prem to cloud platforms, moving from Toolsâ to Snowflake, we're doing all these things. They're a trigger to the problem. Just keep that in mind. So when you start to really look at what's happening in companies, so it's not so much that migration that's the problem, it's the fact that when they get to the new world, everything sucks, okay? And that's where you have to look at change and the impact of it, right? I'm kind of getting some positives heading on there. And then all these regular rack and releases that go through. So company Aegon, a big, very, very boring company. Okay, but they're huge. They have these investment models that they use to care for people's asset management. Every time they change them, they put in the new asset models. You have to test. That's kind of the underlying theme of everything is you have to test that data to know it's correct before you put it in production. So these are all the kind of changes that can come through that spur these problems. And if you don't, what's going to happen? You're going to have $7 million loss in a multi-million thing, a reputational damage because they could not get their testing cycles done in time to get things moved to production. It's about time to market. They don't come into you and say, hey, write this great report and just get back to me when it's ready. Okay? They want you in the real companies, you have deadlines and you have to produce this stuff and it's got to be exact in time. And when those deadlines get pushed out, customers don't get served. Bad things happen to the company. Time to market, efficiency are all important. And this being late, manual testing. Okay, how do people test data today? Anybody know? It's all, what do you say?
So when I'm testing my data, I want to make sure that if 10 people play Call of Duty one day, that they played 10 Call of Duty games that day. And that's nothing like money or anything. Well, I also manage, like, if I do calculate, so I already activated, and one of the things that we have to do is monetization. So if people buy skins, I need to know that in my data, there's $10 if somebody bought a skin, and there's $10 one day. And I mean, that's one way.
Right. So, but in the process of doing it, usually what people do are two ways they test data. They write a bunch of SQL scripts that then allow them to go through pool data sets, and then they look at those. And the word look is the problem here. Or if you're at Norfolk Southern, okay, they have a screen up here with SAP and ERP system and in the reports, and there's a lady who spends all day doing this. And for the video, I don't know if it's on it, but I'm basically looking at both my hands back and forth. And I ask her, how often do you do that? She says, I do it all day, every day, just staring at data. It's called manual stare and compare. Okay, that is not the way that you do it. And frankly, ExxonMobil, I'm in a meeting, we explain, and so I'm going to explain that the key to the manual process is automation. And everything that we do in this world, whether you're doing the quality part of this, automation is the key. Whether you're doing security, if you don't have automation in the processes and you're depending on manual stare and compare, you are failing, guaranteed. All right. And all the companies are failing. So you come in, data analytics, look at what I can do and all this. Oh, by the way, we're going to put automation in to make sure all that data has good quality. Then you become a hero. But if you forget that piece, not guaranteed you're going to be the hero. And then this inefficient management response, this really rolls around to the fact that it's like if you get into a situation where in order to just check the data, I have to be a SQL guru of the nth degree, okay? That is not gonna work for most companies. Because if I go to a VP of finance at ExxonMobil, they do not have super SQL skills. They're depending on people to be able to do that and make sure that they know how to handle the data for them. They've got people checking that. So exact examples here. I kind of told you about it. WorldPay, all right? They spent $100 million plus on a system that nobody was using. By the way, great data analytics system, right? All right, they spent all this money on getting off. Raja, you'll tell you, we put in the whole system. The data was bad. The VPs go to a meeting. Here's the numbers. The other VPs like the numbers. They don't match. Throw it out. $100 million on the line. All right. So you go in and you say, okay, I'm building this system, but I'm going to build quality in. They're going to trust the data. That's the key. You got to have trust for management in that data. Then at Nationwide, they have all these ERP systems. So ERP, enterprise resource planning, systems like SAP, Oracle, all these systems that run the business. They put all the data together. They put it into flows to, in this case, produce all their invoices. Well, one day they data problem, they have 40,000 bad invoices. How are you going to fix that? Well, they were planning about 1,000 people to come in and do stare and compare on the PDFs. Okay, this is going on. I am not making these stories up every day. All right, then compliance fines. I talked a little bit about that. So this is kind of a cool use case where a major bank, I'm not going to call them out on the air, but had $50 million in AML fines. AML is anti-money laundering. So what that says is if you think about it, the crux of it is you can't deposit $10,000 in cash without reporting it to the government. And you got to check lists of people who are known terrorists so that that doesn't end up with planes doing bad things in big cities. All right. So, but think about all the ways that you could do that. I could go to a branch in this city and put in 500. I go branch in this city, get a loan there, pretend to put a payment, put the money with it. I could do this. They had over 70,000 different data scenarios they have to check for compliance. Remember, our compliance guys show up and they say, did you test all these? You know that every one of these are good. There's no way somebody could pull this off doing it this way. And they're like, well, we use manual stare and compare. We only be able to do a few hundred scenarios. It takes us several weeks to do those. All right. So in this case, we came in, I'll just pitch here for Tricentis. We were able to use our technology, build the scenarios that needed to be covered. We covered all 70,000 scenarios and we could run it in literally a couple of minutes. So if you use automation, whatever it is, these are the kind of things you can avoid. So these are huge ticket items for companies. And the issue is people say, when we were in that Zoomy, what's her name? Boomi, like a great MDM system or great cataloging systems you have. I'm not saying throw that out. Those are great systems. But the problem is they don't look at the entire process from end to end. They basically solve it at a point. And I'm not, again, saying that those are not valid systems you should have, but you have to have something that can tell me from the very beginning, whether it's on an SAP system, whatever ERP comes in flat file from the web, structured, unstructured, you know, CSV, XML, JSON, Avro, Parquet, whatever that is, from that input all the way to my cool report that data is correct. So I give always this ExxonMobil example. I have a dashboard. You may have heard me if you've been talking, I tell the story all the time. You have a report on there, oil storage. Okay. Nobody stores more oil than ExxonMobil. By the way, I have permission by these companies to tell these stories. So that's a very important number, right? And they come in, we test it every day back to the analytics system in warehouse to make sure it's correct. I mean, we check it like 100 times a day. And I told them, it's wrong. Why is it wrong? And they flipped out. And I said, because you're not checking it all the way back to all the source from all the tanks and all the world that come in to know that it went in right, went through the system right, came through the ETL processes right, ended up into the analytics, and ended up on the port correct. And I didn't really know, but I was lucky. They were off by 1/1000%. So all this beautiful aggregation of data that you do to pull these numbers, you can't spot 1,000% just looking at a report. The problem is it was a $2.2 million a month problem. That's $24 million right there, I saved. So believe it or not, they bought the system. So the key here is you've got to be able, don't count on these point solutions. Don't look at these systems like Snowflake that are very captured. So it ends up in S3 buckets. It goes through the Snowflake process, great. Then it ends up in Tableau. Where did the data come from before that went into the S3 bucket? How did the data integration on that work? So you can do your piece great, but if you don't check it all, it could be failure. So you go try to find the problem. Where did it happen? Did it happen in integration? Did it happen in transform? Is the report running for? And then that's where we see our old friend manual stare and compare. So the story is people go into they go in and you're the guy and you're writing the data analytics package. You're going to do a cool new data analytics formula on their algorithm, right? You test it. You know it's good. But then on the other end, it sucks. It didn't work. Why? There's a very important business process called regression testing. Okay, learn. I'm sorry, it's also basic. I'm not making it. This is not the like, oh God, this guy figured it out. Whenever you make a change, you have to know that change didn't break anything, but you also have to know it, not just that part, but the entire process did not regress, that it didn't break anything else. There's certain inputs that will break it, that the outputs downstream are still correct. So I don't know if a lot of people have done software development before or such, okay? So you're a developer, you write some code. So then you call your boss, you say, it's good, I tested it, I did what's called a unit test, I'm moving it to production, right? No, that's not how it happens in the real world, okay? In companies, we don't allow, there's a thing called risk management. That's what this is about. You don't move your change as a developer into production and then we cross our fingers and hope that it doesn't break. It happens all the time. And that's insane. But that's what we do in the data world. We allow an ETL developer to make changes and move them to production. And you've got to think that we've got the integration test this, we've got a UAT test it. It has to pass these quality gates before it's moved to production. And I know in the data world, I feel some people may go, does this guy think we're all stupid? But I'm just saying that it's weird that is the, you know, I've got a proof point in the software world. We don't do this. So we need to bring that same rigor and discipline to the data world. Okay. Again, just last picture. If you want to trust production, you don't see all this monitoring and profiling and MDMing you can put out here. You must test end-to-end in the test environments. I can't believe I have to tell people that, but you would not believe the big companies that don't understand that. And then they wonder why nobody's using their systems. Why the data's all wrong? Why did we do that? The data said it was a good idea. We could buy more oil. The tanks are all full. All right. Huh? Well, now if you're running us, this isn't going to be a problem, but everyone else, So it's time to think differently, bring this discipline to your data. And so to do it, you got to have three things. Three things. You must be able to test end to end. It must be able to look at that source all the way through, not just test the piece, but test the entire process. It must be automated because you can't do manual stare and compare. You have to use automation to get through all the coverage and all the scenarios that you need to make sure it's good. And it must be continuous. And what I mean by continuous is it can't be something that I depend on Christian to run on Friday night and the boss calls him up and says, hey, did you run the job to check it? It's got to be built into your data pipelines. It's got to be built into the processes so it can run all the time. At WorldPay, they run 200 million tests every 20 minutes on their data with our software. And it just runs. And so the minute a change is introduced that breaks that baseline of regression, they know, right? And they know immediately when there's a problem. All right. And one of the points I'm going to bring up too is that we're talking to other folks that look at stuff. You can't just depend on data coming in through flat files, coming in from other data sources, coming in a data format. SAP world, a lot of that data you have to pull. Mainframe data, you may be able to, we can get to the mainframe data, but you may not have access to all that. You may have to be able to look at UIs and applications to pull data. And of course, APIs. So if somebody comes to you and that's part of the sources you have to be able to check. All right. And if you do that, all these grades, you're going to catch the issues up front, you're going to test at scale and speed, and you're going to end up with that higher quality. This is the kind of checks you have to do. You got to be able to do these sources. You got to pre-screen all the data, all the files coming in. You got to do vital checks to make sure that the data has all the basics of quality, referential integrity, completeness, aggregations, and all the ETL testing, the reconciliation testing, and the report map testing. If I see this column is green here, I should be able to look back all the way through a process and know, yes, it should be green, right? And little pitch for us. So we use a thing called model-based test automation. And that's our claim to fame at Tricentis. And basically what it says is this. So if you think about the scripting world, people writing all these SQL scripts to test all this data, all right, what does a SQL script have in it? It's got something to connect to. Okay, you got to connect the data source and pull it. It's got to, select da-da-da-da-da. It's got a business logic in there, and it's got a set of parameters where data is, this and this and this, right? So what we do is we take that business logic and build a template that can be reused over and over and over. Then we build all the tests automatically. Nobody writes a test. We take that template, overlay those parameters with it. And again, cool, you're testing with the data. And you end up with thousands of tests. So I'll give you a good example. It kind of explains it. Nationwide, talked about that, but claim ID has to have an exact format. So this very complex SQL statement that every field test has to be checked to make sure all through this process is there. So I had 10,000 scripts they had written for a test to make sure that as they made a change in their warehouse and they wanted to test it, they would run those scripts across that, right? But somebody would have to go in and modify all those scripts, which took weeks. With this, because I have it all, the logic in one place, I can just right click and 2 seconds get set up for a test run. So this makes it very easy for your people to continually test. We made a change, no problem. Change the logic in the template, pop all 10,000 tests, run the tests in the next 5 minutes. So this is the kind of process you've got to look to set up. And these are all kind of basic things, but that you're going to see when you're testing. One of the things you got to be able to do is get on-demand test data. So because we're using data to drive the test, we know that the test data is correct that we're feeding into the test. Let's get a little into the weeds here. I talked about maintenance is the problem, right? As you build tests, maintaining them. So you've got to have a system that's automated in the creation, maintenance, and execution of testing on that data to make sure it's always right. Okay? The shift left. Everybody hears that. So it's a software term, but it's the same way in data, right? When you look at it, there's a guy, me and Ozzy, one of the guys in the room knew him, Wayne Ariola, tell this story, and it's a little bit probably not politically correct, but I'm going to tell it anyway. All right, so there's a river, and guy's walking along the river, and he sees people floating by in the river. And so he runs in there, he's trying to grab ones out before they drown, he's throwing darts at them, he's pulling them all out, okay? A guy from Tricentis walks up, says, wow, that's terrible. Walks about 100 yards upstream, and up there's a bridge with a guy throwing people in the river. And he goes up there and knocks that guy out. That's what's called root cause. That's what you do with risk management. You want to find the problems. That's why I was saying test before you put it in production as early in the cycle before they end up in production. Your MDM system should just be a catcher net for a hockey net, but there's got to be a goalie in front, right? Or it doesn't make any sense. All right, and so how this process has got to work, you've got to be, whether you're a business analyst, you got to be able to use it. Whether you're a data expert, whether you're quality assurance, anyone in the company has to be able to write tests, and it's got to be easy to use, and you've got to put that in. Once you get those tests created, you've got to get them into run. You've got to have reporting that's very actionable. It says exactly where the problem is. And then outside of that, you've got to have a way to make sure that, you know, we tested what we should, match it up with your requirements. It's all kind of basic stuff. And then you just keep it on a cycle, fix it, keep it running all the time. And at that point, the world changes for everybody. So that's it. That's what you got to do. I'm sorry. Have to be that. Any questions? All right.
What's the total amount of money saved?
Well, the biggest one, I won't mention them live, but I think I may have told you, is a drug manufacturer who, by the way, you did not get their vaccine because they were using AI and ML. They had all the research ever loaded since 1974. Anything that could ever happen to a rat, they had it in this data source. And they were taking all that data, driving it through machine learning to drive their vaccine innovation and development. And guess what? They had 3 very nice ladies who were checking that data. And they were manual steering, comparing as fast as you could hope. They weren't getting nothing done. And so their drugs didn't come through. That was $1 billion use case. All right. The ExxonMobil was 24 million, 50 million on the manual steering compare that 1,000 controllers spending 30%. They said, if you want to know, it's like, is this a big impact? We were kind of talking about it. Go find a business analyst, the CFO, go to the office and say, hey, what are all these guys doing? We got 1,000 controllers here. What are they doing? They're staring at screens. What are they staring at? They're checking and fixing data. That was $50 million problem. 50 million on AML fines. The Aegon example, and Ryan will tell you this, is kind of a double whammy, okay? So they get these investment models in. They were supposed to check them. They weren't checking them. There were just a few people spot checking, right? So went to compliance. The FINSA investment people showed up and said, did y'all check this data? They said, yeah. They said, well, you didn't do a very good job. $100 million fine. So then they said, okay, we got to fix this. So how do we fix it? We get enough people in there where we can do 6,000 hours for every change of manual stare and compare. 6,000 hours. Those poor people. So that had some cost associated, figure some different hourly rate times 6,000 every month. They would have to go through that. And so then they brought automation. So that was 100 million, let's say 150 million. It goes on and on. I promise you, your company, whoever it is is having multi-million-dollar problems with this. And if you talk to the right people and find them, we can show them how to solve those problems. And like I said, I've always talked about like our two champions at Nationwide are now officers in the company. They're like, Kristen, we got this huge promotions because the company comes back and says, you know, these are the people we trust to solve the big problems. You're going to get the rocket ship to the top. So that's my speech on that. So I really don't know the total amount, but it's just, it's huge. I will go and try to figure out, Chris, I'll link to you what I think the total is. Does that make sense? Yeah, go ahead.
My team were like just starting out. It's like we were, I think, barely able to identify like this is a problem for us, like maybe testing in our pipeline. And one of the things we're kind of just brainstorming for us is automating, obviously, but how do you send? And we're currently exploring using like Tableau dashboards to help us keep track of when things are actually coming. But I think we've found that Tableau dashboards are a little bit too like removed from our daily workflow. So we're exploring things like maybe emails, like automated emails that can let us know that something in our pipeline is, isn't working, or there's like data issues or whatever. Just curious if you had any like tips on, or just like share, like if you could share your insight on how, like your model or at your your company, let's say there's issues that you find, how to like the workers become alerted to that.
Oh, okay.
Emails
Yeah.
or
All right. So the key thing that, and I'm not attacking anyone, but you're doing wrong is this. Okay. You're again looking at it after the fact. The body's floating down the river. Yeah. What we want to do is during the process, find the guy throwing them off the bridge, right? So we need to have something in place to monitor each one of those. So what's important is to find a mechanism, and I would say at a small company startup, anything that you can basically embed into the process. So in the real world, folks, you don't do anything without tests. So if I have an ETL that job runs, what's the next step that runs? The ETL job test. If I have an integration job that's pulling data in, run that test, having notifications in there, in your pipeline, build that automation using Jenkins or all these, like Informatica has their own ETL driving process. If you use Informatica, there's all kinds of options for that. And by the way, we work with all of them. But whatever those are, you've got to build into that pipeline that ability so that you know and get that notification. And then it's also good, like you said, to have those dashboards, but like our tooling supplies that red, green, blue, covered, not covered look. But you've got to find a way to where it's like you get notified and you have a place that you can go back to once you get notified and say, oh, I see where the problem is. And let me explain something too. This is all about risk management, which is just like a wonderful, exciting to end up with. Man, that guy bored us at the end. But the key is that it's really important. But the key thing on risk management is that you can't test everything, okay? If I've got a process that makes sure that the birth dates are correct on people's process or they get a birthday notification, and you told the CIO, this goes back to that project thing. Oh, I did that. I checked the birth dates on everybody. They're not going to care. You've got to be able to look at the risk associated with the process and what the value of that is, and then make sure that you're focused on the risk. And that's one of the things we do is we weight that risk to know and understand, hey, this thing failing is a bad day. Everybody's account balance is wrong. That's going to get people upset. You got their birthday wrong. Maybe they're upset, but not as big a problem. You see? So use that risk idea, embed it, and be able to catch that notification at the moment it happens. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So when you initially set it up, right, you do all the investigation, kind of understand what kind of risk stuff that happens. But I think the hardest thing is maintenance, right? Because things change over time. They get new data sources. You're having a CMS that people are, entering the data, and then these people change it, change. So you have different, ways of entering the data. How do you set up the QA kind of catch also the unexpected stuff? Is there a way kind of like, I think in production, they call it like predictive maintenance kind of. So you can predict if something can fail or might fail.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about using a predictive maintenance type approach. What we look at it is this. First thing is that you've got to build a system, whatever you're doing, expecting things to change all the time. So that's got to be built in. So it kind of goes back to that model-based approach, where as things change, we can quickly monitor that. The other thing that is really important is that as I'm making changes to the system, I'm continually testing. So I spot those changes not as the fault. If the developer changes metadata on something and then somehow promotes it in, I immediately know about that. So it's really, to me, the maintenance kind of comes from the standpoint of it's like, well, I've got a big project and I've got to make all these changes to test for that project, and I got to pull the test data for that. And if you think about it more in kind of an agile world, this is another thing too that I hate to, but in the software world, they don't do these mega projects as a process to where they plan it out that, you know, what used to be called waterfall. And I don't want to be talking down to folks, but it's where it's like, you know, I'm sorry, but you know, you go through 6 months and then we do that, then it goes to QA, and then we make all the changes in a year, we have a release. Okay. If you're building a continuous process and you're setting yourself up to make these changes in an agile methodology, you're going to find that the maintenance, especially if you've got something that really assists you on that changes and spotting them and making the changes to validate that, then it rolls. So I always sometimes talk to people about regression, and I was in with a data guy and I said, well, how did it regress? Because you build a test and then you change something, he's like, that's gonna break all my tests. And I'm like, yeah, that's what regression's about. And then you look at those changes and you say, the breaks, and you say, yep, that's what I expected. Now I say, good, that's my new baseline, and I can move forward. So you see all these people doing data migrations, and you're moving to the cloud, right? So here's your data migration. We moved some stuff. Hey, that worked pretty good. We moved some more stuff. Hey, that looked pretty good. I actually experienced this with TJ Maxx. We moved some more stuff. Oh my God, it broke everything. Okay, start over, move some more stuff. Literally, this can go on for years in big corporations because they can't get through it because they're constantly taking 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Regression allows you to know with every step forward, you are good. So see, I'm moving forward all the time, every step. I'm not going like this, okay? And I know this sounds, and I'm not trying to be talked down, but I'm just saying these are such basic principles of how the world of systems work. So anyway, I'm sorry if I didn't mean to talk.
So it'd be like change, impact of change,
Right.
and it's still not enough. How do I now apply automation to handle that change so I could change at scale? So that I don't have build my model or make my change, build my model, something changes, update that model's gonna automatically update all my.
Right, exactly.
So if you leave one of those out, you won't get to that point where you have change, you know it impacted something, but now what? Are you gonna do something manually to go 10,000, or are you gonna update it in one place and have it update the rest of the report, which will enable you to scale at speed?
And really, and like I said, just don't forget those 3 things. End-to-end, automation, continuous. And I don't care if you're talking about security, if you're talking about everything, it's got to be end-to-end, guys. It's got to be automated, and it's got to be continuous. It's only 3 things we got to do. And you can solve some of the biggest problems in business, and you'll be shocked at how many people will go, what do you mean we got to automate this? I will tell you, honestly, this is another cool story real quick. I don't know it's getting late. I'm way over time, ain't I?
Yeah, well, there's another session, so.
Oh, okay. All right, Bruce, real quick. So I'm at a company and they come in and we're there showing them and they said, we have to validate and reconcile all these records from this is an insurance company, health insurance company. It's a Blue Cross Blue Shield. I won't tell you which one. And they're sending all the data out and they have to send it back to the providers, the hospitals and the people that said it. And so they got to validate it. So they got this guy, Sam and Joe, and they check this data every day. to make sure that it's going. And I say, okay, that's cool. So literally about 10 minutes, we set up an automated test to do that forever. And then I saw, I like that. It's like, well, how long have you guys been doing this? And the guy said, well, I've been doing it for 25 years. Just all day checking that data. This is everyday stuff, people. And the guy next to him says, yeah, here's the good news, Josh, you're about to retire. And we won't have to hire a replacement. So he has 25 years of checking data that he could have had. I'm sorry. And I mean, it's sometimes it's sad, you know, because there are people who may really enjoy that. I have yet to meet anyone who really enjoys it, but you know, that's not a good life to lead. Okay, come on. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm not gonna say this is my company.
It's a company that sounds like my, no, I'm
It's
just
a
kidding.
company that sounds like my company. Can't figure it out. Let's say I inherited this massive ETL pipeline that has 0 testing on it. What should I build first? Allegedly.
Okay, well, what you're gonna have to do is this. This is what you need to do. You need to identify all the scenarios and the data that needs to go in to do a test. You gotta build a test environment, just a starter test environment.
So that's, I finished that.
Okay, oh, you got your test environment.
So
All
now,
right.
like, what
So
test?
now you've got to build, if you want to make sure that this piece is working right, you've got to build that end-to-end regression. So you know that if anyone ever touches that thing or moves it, then, you know, I have to do it now, or you can do nothing. So let me explain to that. Okay, I know it's a weird look I got there. So I worked for a company, EDS, Ross Pro's company way back in the day. They had COBOL code on the mainframe. I wrote a lot of COBOL code back then. A gray hair, very old guy. And what happened was they had 50,000 man years of COBOL code that they use on what they call the insurance machine for running claims. And this is runs, and it runs every night on the big mainframe. And you know how much they test it? 0. You know why? Because it never changes. So the key is to really identify what your change factor is. If it's something to where this ETL pipeline's fine, it works great, we don't change anything, the data never changes, you may have to do very little just checking it. But if it's true, if it's changing it, then you're gonna have to be able to baseline so you know when anybody changes it, I know what the problems are. Okay, build that regression and then and link me up on LinkedIn. I can give you some info and help on that. So, any good session? That good? All right. Thank you very much. All right, so networking event, right? Or I guess you'll do it.
Yeah, so, yeah, thank you again, Chris, and thank you guys for joining. So the